excerpt from Senchaku Hongan Nembutsu Shu, or On the Nembutsu Selected in the Primal Vow, by Hônen. On the Nembutsu selected in the Primal Vow, Dao Zhuo established the division of the Buddhist teachings into two gateways, the path of the sages and the path of birth into Amida Buddha's Pure Land. His intent was to encourage people to abandon the former and pursue the latter. There are two reasons for this. First, we are now far removed from the time when the great sage Shakyamuni was alive. Second, the truth is profound, but the capacity of beings to apprehend it is now meager. The master Shandao states that although numerous forms of practice may lead to birth in the Pure Land, they may all be distinguished as either right practice or practice of sundry good acts. Right practice may be grasped by first disclosing it as 5 specific forms of practice, then grouping these into 2 basic types. The 5 forms of right practice are recitation of Pure Land scriptures, contemplation of Amida in the Pure Land, bowing in worship, utterance of the name of Amida, and praise of Amida's virtue and making offerings. The 2 basic types of right practice are the right action and the auxiliary actions. The right action is utterance of the name, the 4th of the 5th forms of right practice. It is called the act by which attainment of birth is truly determined, for it is in accord with Amida Buddha's primal vow. Question: why is only one of the 5 forms of right practice, saying the Nembutsu, taken up as the truly determining act? Answer: because saying the Nembutsu is in accord with Amida Buddha's primal vow. It is the practice taught in the vow. Hence, if one performs it, then carried by the Buddha's vow, one will unfailingly attain birth. The distinction between right practice and practice of sundry good acts may be clarified using a 5-fold contrast. 1. Intimate versus distant. Intimate means that persons who perform the truly determining act and the auxiliary actions are in a relationship with Amida Buddha of great closeness and intimacy. Shandao states, when sentient beings give rise to practice and constantly say Amida Buddha's name with their lips, Amida hears them. When they constantly worship and revere Amida Buddha with their bodies, Amida sees them. When they constantly think on Amida Buddha with mind and heart, Amida apprehends them. When sentient beings are mindful of Amida, Amida is mindful of them. The acts of the Buddha and beings in each of the 3 modalities, bodily, verbal, and mental, are mutually inseparable. This is what is meant by intimate. Distant refers to the performance of sundry good acts. When sentient beings do not say Amida Buddha's name, Amida does not hear them. When they do not worship Amida Buddha with their bodies, Amida does not see them. When they do not think on Amida Buddha with heart and mind, Amida does not apprehend them. When sentient beings are not mindful of the Buddha is not mindful of them. The acts of the Buddha and beings in the 3 modalities always stand isolated from each other. This is characterized as distant. 2. Near versus separated. Near means that persons who perform the truly determining act and the auxiliary actions are right beside Amida Buddha. Shandao states in his commentary, when sentient beings aspire to see Amida Buddha, Amida, in response to their thoughts, appears before their eyes. Hence, near. Separated refers to the practice of sundry other good acts. When sentient beings do not aspire to see Amida Buddha, Amida does not appear before them. 3. Uninterrupted versus discontinuous. Uninterrupted means that persons who perform the truly determining act and the auxiliary actions are mindful of Amida Buddha without interruption. Discontinuous means that persons who perform sundry good acts always interrupt their mindfulness of Amida Buddha. 4. No necessity of directing one's merit versus the necessity of directing merit. For persons who perform the truly determining act of saying the name and the auxiliary actions focused on Amida Buddha, these naturally become acts resulting in birth and the Pure Land, even though the practitioners do not undertake the directing of the merits towards that end. Hence Shandao states, the Contemplation Sutra states, performing 10 voicings of the Buddha's name, such utterance of namu Amida butsu is possessed of both the aspiration and the practice that are requisite for fulfilling the path. Both accomplish tenfold. How does this come about? Namu manifests the taking of refuge in Amida's vow. It signifies awakening aspiration for birth and turning one's heart to the Pure Land. Amida Butsu manifests the practice. Because the Nembutsu possesses this meaning, persons who say it unfailingly attain birth. The necessity of directing one's merit means that for persons who perform sundry good acts, these acts become the cause resulting in birth in the Pure Land only when they deliberately undertake to direct the resulting merits thus. If they do not purposely direct their merits towards birth in the Pure Land, their good acts do not become the cause for attainment of birth there. 5. Authentic versus commingled. Authentic means that for persons who perform the truly determining act and the auxiliary actions, these are purely the practice for birth in the land of bliss. Commingled means that the acts are not practices purely for birth in the land of bliss. They are common to birth into the realms of human beings and devas, and also into the conditions of the three vehicles. They are also common to birth into the various pure lands of the Buddhas throughout the 10 quarters. Hence, such practice is said to be commingled. Consequently, practitioners who aspire for Amida's land in the western quarter should abandon practice of sundry good acts and perform the truly determining act of saying the name. The larger sutra states, if, when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters, with sincere mind entrusting themselves, aspiring to be born in my land, and saying my name even but 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. In his Methods of Contemplation on Amida Butsu, Shandao interprets this passage in a paraphrase. If, when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters aspire to be born in my land, and say my name even 10 times, entrusting themselves to the power of my vow, and yet should not attain birth, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. Each Buddha makes 2 kinds of vows, those common to all and those specific to themselves. Those in common are the 4 universal vows. The specific are, for example, the 500 great vows of Shakyamuni, or the 12 superior vows of medicine teacher Buddha. The 48 vows are the specific vows of Amida. The large sutra of Amida Buddha states, the Buddha world sovereign, Lokeshvara Raja, selects qualities from the good and bad of the devas and humans in all the 21 billion Buddha lands, and from the comeliness and disagreeableness of the lands themselves, in order that bodhisattva dharma repository, Dharmakara, might select the vows for what he desired in his heart. The term select in this passage implies adopting, on the one hand, and discarding on the other. The bodhisattva dharma repository, who became Amida Buddha, discarded the reprehensible qualities of the humans and devas of the 21 billion pure lands of the Buddhas, and adopted their good qualities. He discarded the disagreeable qualities of the lands and adopted their comeliness. The meaning of selection and adoption may be discussed with regard to each of the 48 vows. Concerning the 18th vow of birth through the Nembutsu, among the lands of the various Buddhas, there is one for which charity is the practice resulting in birth there, and another for which it is observance of precepts. There is a land for which patience is the practice for birth there, another for which it is perseverance, another for which it is meditation, and yet another for which it is wisdom. There are lands for which erecting stupa towers and creating Buddha images, or almsgiving to mendicants, or filial piety and veneration of teachers and elders are each the practice resulting in birth there. Thus, a variety of practices result in birth in the different lands. It is impossible to state them in detail. The Bodhisattva Dharma Repository selected out and discarded the various practices mentioned above, charity, precepts, filial piety, and so on, and selected out and adopted the wholehearted saying of the Buddha's name, hence the term selection. Question: is it reasonable that in each of the vows the Bodhisattva Dharma Repository should discard what is coarse and reprehensible and adopt what is good and excellent? But why, in the 18th vow, did he discard all the diverse practices and select and adopt only the single practice of saying the Nembutsu, making it the primal vow of birth in his land? Answer: the Buddha's sacred intent is hard to fathom. It is not easily to be grasped. Nevertheless, an attempt may be offered here, utilizing two concepts: the contrast between superior and inferior, and the contrast between difficult and easy. Regarding the first contrast, the Nembutsu is superior, and other practices are inferior. This is because myriad virtues have come to reside within Amida's name. All the virtues possessed by Amida Buddha, all the inwardly realized virtues such as the 4 wisdoms, 3 bodies, 10 powers, and 4-fold fearlessness, and all the outwardly functioning virtues such as a Buddha's marks and features, the light of wisdom, the teaching of dharma to beings, and the benefiting of living things, have been gathered into Amida Buddha's name. Thus the virtues of the name are wholly superior. Other practices are not so. They each prop up but a portion of merit, hence they are said to be inferior. Regarding the second contrast, saying the Nembutsu is easy, while other practices are difficult. Since the Nembutsu is easy, it is accessible to all. Other practices, being difficult, are not available to every being. It was surely to bring all sentient beings to birth in the Pure Land, without any discrimination, that the Bodhisattva Dharma repository discarded the difficult and adopted the easy, making the latter the core of the Primal Vow. Had the making of images and the erection of stupa towers been made the core of the Primal Vow, the poor and destitute would have been left without any hope of birth. And yet the wealthy and highborn are few, while the lowly and poor are numerous. Had wisdom and lofty capacities been made the core of the Primal Vow, the dull and foolish would have been left without any hope of birth. And yet the sagacious are rare, while the foolish and ignorant are many. Had study and broad learning been made the core of the Primal Vow, those of little knowledge would have been left without any hope of birth. And yet the learned are few, and those without learning many. Had observance of precepts been made the core of the Primal Vow, those who failed to uphold or receive precepts would have been left without any hope of birth. And yet, keepers of precepts are few, while violators are many. This applies to all the other forms of practice. Know that had the various practices mentioned above been made the core of the Primal Vow, those attaining birth would have been few, while those unable to be born would have been numerous. For this reason, Amida Buddha, in the distant past, as the Bodhisattva Dharma repository, was moved by undiscriminating compassion and sought to embrace all beings universally. In order to do so, he declined to make the various forms of practice, such as creating images and erecting stupa towers, the practice resulting in birth in the Primal Vow. Rather, he made the single practice of simply saying the name of the Buddha the core of his Primal Vow.